Well, I'm excited to have another conversation on another Redemptive Global Quest. It's great to have Steve Beck, a longtime friend of Praxis, here with us. And like Jin Ho, another exemplar. Just to recap, a Redemptive Quest has sort of four elements to it. It involves a willingness to take a risk, secondly, to bear a cost on behalf of someone else. Thirdly, to restore something that's broken. And then lastly, to aim that at a major issue or an incredibly hard problem to solve. And it starts with risk. One of the things we talk about at Praxis with questing is, are you willing to risk or re-risk? And Steve has not only risked, but he's really had a life of re-risking, as you'll hear here in a moment. So Steve, first of all, welcome. Great to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'd like to take us maybe to start all the way. Oh, and I should say this. Steve's career has spanned from strategy consulting to economic development to creating a philanthropic investment bank, Geneva Global, to creating an African venture capital firm, Novastar. And so multiple moves and pivots along the way in this life of re-risking. But I think it'd be great for the audience to start with the first risk. Maybe take us back to what was the first risk that you took vocationally, and was there a moment or a seed of discontent or wonder that you began to think, I want something more than just traditional success? And how did you discern that risk?
Yeah, it has been a bunch of different re-risks. And so I'll try to kind of go to one of the beginnings, maybe. And there are some of you in this room I know who knew me when we were starting Geneva Global in 2000, around 2000, 2002 is when I moved across. And my hair was brown then. So risk doesn't involve sacrifice. But I suppose that's the first re-risk that I want to come to, Sajan. But I graduated from university having done international relations, economics. I became a believer, a Christ follower, the summer after I graduated. And I was really struck by Jesus' compassion for the poor. And so I had it kind of burning in my heart, this desire to be of service to people living on the margins. And so what did I do? I went into management consulting. I did have that heart, and I was in consulting in the Bay Area for 3 years, worked with some phenomenally smart people, developed some great kind of foundational skills. But I had that burning desire. I met my wife, who was also my chief compliance officer, chief household officer, and just life partner now for over 40 years. And she and I both kind of had this desire, and I decided to get some more training, and so went to do a PhD at the London School of Economics in development economics. And so that was kind of a step. I left my consulting job, sort of entry-level consulting, went there and was going to pursue that. And we basically, in doing that, ran out of money when our first child was being born. And so I went back to the same consulting firm. It opened an office in London. And so I went back there and put my head down, and I was good at it. And I was promoted to partner by the time I was 32. And it was all consuming, frankly. And so I was basically head down, working 80 hours a week in consulting in London. We had our family, our kids were born there. I was traveling a lot. There were lots of good things about that. I ended up managing consulting firms, so I had an influence over the way we were doing the work, so that kind of moving on that redemptive frame out towards the kind of redemptive how we work, the redemptive operating model. But at the end of the day, the output of our work was helping Fortune 200 companies increase their ROE to cost of equity, to increase shareholder value. And my job was helping chief executives figure out where to play and how to win. And it was not connected, the output, the what wasn't connected to that thing that I had in my heart. And so I had an opportunity to take a leave of absence and go and work with a couple of eccentric multi-billionaires who were talking about setting up Geneva Global, and they had, around 2000, got it up and running. And I know the idea of a philanthropic investment bank sounds like a triple oxymoron to most of you here. But their idea was, where the marginal dollar make the biggest kind of life change difference. And I thought, oh, this is it. This is me. This is what I wanted to do. And so we took a decision after a long period of time of agonizing over this, praying about it, because it wasn't now just me, it was my wife. We had 3 children in school with established friendships in central London. Sorry, Andy, we were being asked to move to the Upper Main Line in Philadelphia, which was not exactly comparing to central London. I took an 85% pay cut to go and do this. So there was sort of stepping into something that I didn't know with a bunch of people I didn't know, but sensing that God was sort of nudging us, almost not I wasn't leaving a kind of, a terrible, I wasn't an arms trader or, wasn't doing something kind of terrible here, but it was really about giving life to this thing of, could we actually be involved a little bit more closely with God's redemptive work amongst people closest to Jesus' heart. And it was almost a sense of, what if we didn't do it? What would we be missing? And so it was almost kind of flipping the question around and going, actually, this journey with Jesus is an epic adventure. It's like we're invited with the master chef into the kitchen, and we sort of play around like toddlers making a mess of it, but he still invites us in to be involved in his redemptive work. And it's almost like we might miss out on that invitation to be more directly involved in that. So we took that decision and made the move to Philadelphia. And it was great. For 5 years, we built the organization. We were granting a lot of money out into programs in global health, human liberty, economic empowerment around the world. Got to travel, got to meet some amazing entrepreneurs who were addressing these problems and working with a huge amount of integrity alongside people living on the margins. But I started seeing interesting for-profit ventures along the way that I thought, if they were successful, would have a more sustainable, more scalable impact on poverty and its effects. And maybe that leads to kind of my second re-risking, but I don't know if you want to go there, Sajan, but essentially that was the kernel of an idea that I became infected with in 2007, which was, could we launch a venture fund that would invest in for-profit businesses that, if they were successful, would solve problems for people living on the margins in health, education, information access, finding businesses that were addressing basic needs for everyday people in sub-Saharan Africa. And that was sort of the journey that I went on that led me from this philanthropic investment bank to investing.
There's a sacrifice involved, and we talk about that a lot at Praxis. And immediately a lot of people's minds go to the financial sacrifice. You talked about an 85% pay cut. But there's actually, and this is true, I think, with a lot of quests, there's multiple dimensions to sacrifice, not just financial. There were additional costs that you had to bear, additional sacrifices. Can you talk about what some of those sacrifices were, and how did that illuminate how you think about work that involves restoration?
Yeah, there was clearly financial sacrifice. I suppose it was also leaving something that I was recognized as being excellent at, and going into something that was sort of new. There was a sort of relationship sacrifice. We were leaving a great church that we were deeply involved in. So all of our friends, as we were praying about this, I realized that my closest friends seemed to be siding on the idea of not doing this. And it was sort of like, I ended up hiring actually a coach who didn't have kind of a dog in that particular hunt, who would provide some advice. So there was, there were those sacrifices. I think I would also say there was a sacrifice for our kids. I mean, they were established in schools. They were 14, 12, and 10 at the time, having grown up in London, I'm American, my wife's British, they were half and half. They all still speak with a sort of funny English accent. The youngest one's more kind of mid-Atlantic now. But yeah, and we were praying about it as a family. And of course, being kids, we would pray about it on a Sunday evening, our kind of weekly family prayer time. And every Monday morning, they'd come down and say, what did God say? Like, what are we doing? You know, so, but there was a sacrifice for them. Some of them were eager for it. Some of them thought we were going to ruin their lives. And that sacrifice actually still plays out. I've got, a child in California, married with 2 grandkids, one in New Jersey, married with one grandchild, one on the way, and one in London. And then mom and dad moved to Nairobi. And so, life gets pretty complicated. And that was some of the other sacrifices that we made.
So you're in Africa, you're trying to create venture capital as an asset class in Africa. And I've heard you say you wanted to move beyond just sort of ethical investing. In fact, you didn't want to be labeled an impact investor. Can you talk a little bit about how do you measure success in a quest where the goal is audacious? It's literally creating a new field that doesn't exist. How do you measure success on that journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for pushing into that. So I think, look, when we started investing in Africa, the first thought was, could we find businesses that would generate significant social and later environmental benefits alongside kind of commercial success? And the idea of the commercial success wasn't just so we would be remunerated, but it was actually so that we could actually catalyze commercial capital going into these types of businesses. And I love what Jin Ho was saying a minute ago. I think we're starting with a premise that the most valuable companies in the world are those that solve humanity's biggest problems. Now, the capital markets don't value companies that way, except when Jin Ho's stock market gets going. But that was sort of the idea. And so could we be a signal investor to businesses that were really having scaled benefits for low-income people and for the planet that we all inhabit? And so when we set out with an $80 million fund in 2014. The total venture funding on the continent of Africa was $100 million. There was no venture asset class on the continent. We were told by the UK Development Bank, who became our anchor investor, when we first pitched the fund to them, and they'd been in, I remember him saying, Steve, we've been investing in Africa for 60 years. Venture will never work in Africa. Now, that same development finance institution anchored our first fund, our second fund, and our third fund. And they have a dedicated venture team. And that venture asset class has grown from $100 million in 2014 to $3.2 billion last year. So 32x growth in venture funding on the continent. Now, some of that is purely opportunistic, it's money-making, but actually in Africa, you can't build a big business solving a problem for the top 5% of the population. You can here. You can build a big business making all of our lives a little bit more convenient. You can't do that on the continent of Africa. So there is impact happening. There is that positive change. I'm now, that word is stigmatized for me from Andy, but there is that kind of positive, beneficial value that's being created, inclusive value being created that way. And so we do measure those things. So we measure, the number of beneficiaries, 70 million people through our portfolio companies, 45 million of them living on $6 a day or less, mitigating 15 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions. I pitch funds, so I can pitch you the success metrics. I can pitch that sort of systemic change that we set out for, the growing asset class, $6 following every dollar that we invest in our companies. All these European DFIs now having dedicated venture programs, seeing that their development mandate and venture capital actually are well aligned. But the question that none of those actually answer the success question. Sorry, I'm going to get funny getting to you. Like those are maybe lead indicators of downstream success, but I find myself asking, how does God see this? Like, what is the fruit of this? And my experience as a Jesus follower over the years is that when the Holy Spirit is involved, the math isn't addition, it's multiplication. And you see this sort of things happen well beyond the thing that you set out to do. And I don't know what the long term is going to be, because I think the success will be measured by him in terms of fruitfulness over generations. And, you know, been at this for 11, well, actually, I've personally been at this for 16 years, but as a fund, 11 years. It's too early to tell. But I think what we do see is we see people starting to think differently about business, about purpose, our own team, you know, really asking our own team, like, what is their core purpose and how does it connect with this purpose of Novastar? And it's in the entrepreneurs that we work with. And some of them are believers and some of them aren't. And the ones who aren't are serving a God they don't yet know. And maybe it's just a few of those entrepreneurs and the lives that are changed there that God says, actually, Steve, that was it. Yeah.
I love how one of the things I've noted in your story is that just a willingness to be generous, and you're shifting the Overton window of what's possible of redemptive investing in Africa, but that actually takes a lot more actors than Novastar, and actually it has engaged you in ecosystem building work. Can you share with our friends in the audience why generosity is so important to this work, and maybe an example or two of where you've had to be, instead of playing into competitive instincts, you've actually been generous, sacrificial even.
Yeah, and look, it would be glib for me to say that's easy to do. It's hard to do because we operate, right, all of us in a world where the kind of scarcity mindset drives behavior. I was struck reading this a few years ago, you know, Walter Brueggemann's paper, kind of the liturgy of abundance and the myth of scarcity. And being challenged by that, being challenged by Dallas Willard, and actually it was a book that was written posthumously, Life Without Lack. You know, if we really believe the first verse of Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. If we really believed that in a way that we acted on it, like we acted as if that were true, it would make us much more open-handed. And I was challenged by that as Novastar. You know, we're the first now to have a third fund, and you know, it is somewhat competitive to raise capital for this rather niche asset class, even though it's now a lot bigger than it was when we started. And so really sort of challenging ourselves and our team to say, well, how can we be more generous and be generative? Because venture, and those of you who are in venture capital know this, venture is a team sport. We need co-investors. It just doesn't work. No one has a big enough fund relative to the need. And so we began very consciously convening not just our entrepreneurs, which we've been doing since we started, but actually co-investors and other investors, other venture funds who've developed, thankfully, over the years since we've been doing this. We've been beginning to share our kind of IP. So we develop pretty deep sector maps and subsector maps of what, you know, kind of how these value chains are working and not working, what business models work and don't work in our territory. And we've said, well, look, we should actually start publishing these. So we just published an EV mobility market map. And it's out there for anybody who wants to use it. And we've got now competing venture funds coming in asking us about that. And I think so being more open-handed and seeking to follow that, you know, seeking to live as though that statement were true, that we're doing what looks like a risky thing, but it's the safest thing in the world, which is just following what Jesus calls us to do.
What final word would you give to, there might be a few people in the audience that are on the precipice of a redemptive quest, and like the younger Steve Beck in management consulting, facing some legitimate concerns about taking that risk, family, financial, real pressures. What word of encouragement would you give them?
Yeah, I suppose I would just go back to what I just said. I think, we are all seen and known and loved by a God who loves us out of his infinite generosity and boundless grace. And we are safe in his arms, ultimately. And so, I think I would want to take some of the pressure off of you around that. Like to say, actually, most of us in this room are very privileged and well endowed with resources, all sorts of capital, intellectual capital, relationship capital, financial capital. Most of us here. We live, probably all of us live in the top 5%, I guess, in the globe. And so ultimately, what are we really risking here? And if God is, if he's whispering to you, even now, if he's nudging you, I'm drawn to the adventure, so I would be saying, well, just go for it. Just take that first step. And we don't know what steps 5, 6, 7, 8 are going to be. God doesn't give us a map. He gives us a guide. So how do we just follow the guide on the next step? So I would want to say go for it. But honestly, of course, pray, listen, have wise counsel around you. Check if your friends are all saying don't do it. They might have a ulterior motive, keeping you close by. But honestly, ultimately, what are we really risking here? Jesus has invited us into this redemptive project. He is redeeming the world. He's renewing all things. And we just get to participate in it. And so let's not miss out on that.
Amen. What I love about the long arc of, Steve, your redemptive journey, your quest, it started with that first risk. And the way that you processed and discerned that risk wasn't the risk itself. It was the risk of not doing it. You actually discerned a status quo risk, which is actually something we don't actually think about. But that, instead of asking the question why, you process the question why not, and entered a long journey of obedience with Jesus. And the rewards are both now and eternal. So please thank Steve Beck for me.